Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is kind of my, not really rock star look, I guess, but so I think I've been invited by the Thunder team to speak here a little bit as the countercultural representative. I mean, we're at a digital content, how do we manage everything digitally? How can we do a better job of doing everything digitally? And I'm here to tell you that digital transformation is not always a good idea. So that's a little bit the countercultural idea. So if we look at here's my topic, old school for the win, how an IT publisher succeeded by ignoring digital transformation. So I am a little bit old school in this, especially in this presentation. I do not have a presentation here, so I still believe in print. I've got my analog presentation with me, and so I hope to give you something to think about and keep everybody a little bit awake before lunch. So that is the message. I mean, in this case, or the basic message. I mean, of course, the topic is a little bit provocative, but I would say that digital transformation is not the right thing for everybody, or it's not the right thing for everybody at this time or at a certain time. And I would like to show you that based on the example of my own industry example, which is the English language IT publishing business. I've been in this business for 25 years and have kind of gone through the entire transformation so far from print to where we are today. So this is a little bit exaggerated. We did not completely ignore digital transformation. But I am here today to be able to give this talk because we did accept digital content and digital transformation in our industry, but we accepted it very minimally, at a very conservative stance, always towards digitalization. And the things that we did them on our own terms. So we didn't follow the competition, we didn't do what everybody else was doing, but we did what we thought made sense for our company and for our customers. So I'll start with that by talking about what did we actually do, or what, just to give you an idea of what our business looks like today. And from a goal, our goal has always been the sustainability of the business. So we wanted to be able to have something that continues well over time and not just looking at what makes sense right now, to try to see things a little bit longer term. So what do? We still produce regular paper magazines, and most of them actually even have a DVD bound into them. So that's pretty old school these days. We also have websites for all of our brands, and these websites do have a paywall. So we have a lot of free content online, but most of that content only becomes free after 12 months, and before that it's behind a paywall, which typically means it's available to subscribers of the magazine, and most of our readers typically combine print and digital. So we actually have more people that buy the digital access to the content as a supplement to their print subscription than people that are pure digital readers. So we also do have pure digital content in the sense of you can consume everything that we create in a digital form. So we started with just normal PDFs of the magazine. So it's literally taking a paper magazine and making it a PDF. We always did that DRM free, so no types of rights management attached to that or no restrictions. I mean, in theory, you could just download it and send it around everywhere or post it on the internet, which surely does happen. But we found that that's never been really much of a problem. And we do have apps on Google and iTunes for our products. However, these are very minimalistic apps. They're essentially just PDF page turners. So I would say it's still the print magazine in different forms, whether it's a PDF or a page turner app on Apple. We also do newsletters. Our newsletters have always had a GDPR-like system for subscribing to them. So we have never just put people in a mailing list. You always had to opt in, and we've had double opt-in, I think, for 8 years. So we always have kind of treated our customers like that, so when the whole GDPR thing happened, that was never really a big deal for us. We had to change a few of the sentences that we used, but our procedures had always been that way. So that's a little bit counterintuitive maybe also, but it was always the right thing to do for our customers, so that's why we did that. And we also have social media that we're somewhat active in. So I think just looking at it in general, the point is we do participate in all of these things, but we're staying well behind the curve of what everyone else is doing or what everyone else is talking about. But I'd like to show that by being conservative and staying behind the curve, that's why we are still here today. So if we talk about our competition, when I first got into IT publishing about 25 years ago, it was just really ramping up, and soon after that there were hundreds of magazines, and later on probably thousands of websites and all kinds of media in this space. And I haven't really tried to do a statistic on it, but I'm guessing that there's maybe 5 or 10% of that left. In the United States, if you don't count or the United States and the UK, the key English language markets, if you don't count games magazines or mobile things like, how to do things with your phone, then there's literally less than 10 magazines, paper magazines for IT topics. So that's amazing when you think about it. I mean, how big is IT in everyone's life? Also, from a professional standpoint, it's a major market. It's something that affects everybody every day, and there's hardly any magazines left for it. And how can that be? And the reason is that most of those publishers put themselves out of business by emphasizing digital way too early, and they're literally all gone now. There's hardly any publishers left that do IT. And some of the companies that are left don't even call themselves publishers anymore. So I wanted to talk briefly about that, about what have the other people done. So part of that is what were the goals that these other companies had. So as I said, we were always looking towards sustainability, but other people had different goals, and maybe they were also successful. If their goal was to get the share price of their company up by the end of the year, then surely some of them achieved that when digital was brand new hot topic. Maybe they wanted to be seen as innovators in the space for other reasons. Maybe the management team wanted to show how up to date they were and how modern, and maybe the goal was really just to get hired by somebody else. I don't know. There were other people, obviously, that had startups that wanted to cash out quickly. So surely some people that did these things achieved those goals that they had. It's just none of those things have anything to do with sustainable business models. So a lot of IT publishers were always driven by the trends. You have to always jump on the next best thing. And I think that's one of the things that is a key lesson here is, you think about publishing and you think about the IT business, then it seems kind of obvious that IT publishing should probably be the very first thing that goes digital, because these are people that are dealing with everything in computers in the first place, and so why shouldn't that be the first market that is digital? And I think a lot of people believe that, and that's why a lot of people went down this path. But the reality is the users, the IT consumers of IT content, they never have really been that interested in digital content, believe it or not. If you go out and ask them, part of it is a demographic question. A lot of people in the IT business are now, let's say, 35 and older, so they're not necessarily digital natives. And a lot of people will say, I spend my entire day in front of a computer anyway. Now I want to sit down and read an article where I'm going to learn something, where I need to focus, and I want to, pull in this content and think about it and understand it. Then the last thing that I need is to be sitting at a computer where every 30 seconds a Slack notification is popping up, and then I'm getting emails, and then something else is happening, and whatever. So on a computer is not necessarily a good place to read, good IT content. And so a lot of people really still prefer paper. Then they go outside at lunch, sit on a park bench, or they read it in the subway, or it sounds funny, but a lot of people have told us, yeah, I'd like to take your magazine to the bathroom because then I have time to read and I'm not disturbed. So there are advantages like that. So I think one of the points is that other publishers tried to do digital things, and a lot of them did them for the wrong reasons. Some of them, sometimes it was about cost cutting, sometimes it was about the technology. The technology can be so exciting, and you think, oh, look at all these great things that we can do, and let's create this. If you dream, out into the horizon and think about what a cool product you can make, and sometimes people get so fascinated with that they want to build the coolest thing possible. The question is anybody willing to pay for that in the end? So just talking about, I wanted to walk you through a few trends in the IT publishing industry that have come over in the last 20 years. And some of these may be recognizable as things that have happened in other markets. Some of them might be specific to IT publishing. But, so where did we start? We started with truly paper magazines that had subscribers that were paying for the magazine, and then there was also advertising in these magazines that was separate from the content. So that's old school. That's what I mean by old school here. That's what we still do, and that's where all this started. So then the first wave of digitalization came along, and what did that mean? So now we have a website. And so we're going to put a bunch of content up for free on the website. So why should we do that? Why are we now giving away our content that people used to have to subscribe for? Well, I guess the big argument back then was reach. We want to reach as many people as possible. That will be good for our brand. There'll be something positive about it, but we don't really have a business model. But we'll figure that out later. So we put all this content up for free. To build our brand and to be, to reach as many people. And that was okay at the beginning, I guess, because, advertising revenue was still okay, and that kind of made sense. But that kind of set up the next wave, which was called lead gen. So lead gen means you're publishing some type of asset, which is typically called a white paper or a case study or something like that, where you're explaining a more complex technical solution that somebody should buy for their business IT infrastructure, and you say, and you put this up on your website and promote it through your newsletters and things, and try to get people to download it and give all of their information, so your name, your title, your contact information, the company you work for, and at the kind of the end of that, it really got into how many people are you responsible for? How many people work in your company? What's your yearly budget? I mean, lots of detailed information. And that was kind of the swing back to the other side. So we were giving away all this content online, and the next step, with no real business model, and the next step was only business model. So the business model of lead generation is that companies would pay a fixed price, typically something like, somewhere between $50 and $200 per lead that you could generate on your website. So they would give you some white paper, which was, at the beginning, they were still quality written, interesting topics, and towards the end of that phase, they were just old, worn out, badly written content that you would put through your system and try to generate leads. And this is when, probably the backlash of not having a business plan with putting all of your stuff online, then the finance people at some point got control of the marketing budgets and said, well, we should be able to calculate all this in advance, and I should be able to say at the beginning of the year, how many leads do we need to generate our sales goals, and I should be able to calculate what should each lead cost me. And so I'm going to put a price tag on it and say a lead costs $50, and that's all I'm going to pay. And I don't care how you get that lead, I don't care where it comes from, but as long as it doesn't cost me more than $50, I'm happy. And so the whole IT publishing industry jumped on this idea of generating all these leads. And so it was all business model and no thought for the customer. So what happened is, this was to me the beginning of real digitalization, because then it became about collecting data. So publishers built up big databases of people to market to and sold this information to other companies. And what happened was that, everything was important except the reader. That was the person's data that you were selling, but nobody was paying attention to provide the reader with something that they really wanted to read. At the beginning, maybe these case studies or white papers were useful, but the quality dropped dramatically as this just became a numbers game about generating as big a numbers as you could. And then there was no other content to go with it. Everything was gated, where you had to fill out a form to get access to anything. And then you download it and learned that it wasn't very good, but then your data kept getting sold to other companies. So, it really exploded for a while. I have a really good example. There's a company in the US that kind of took this idea and really went crazy with it. They were a startup. They went from within a couple of years, they had turnover, I think, of $30 million in their second year. They got venture capital funding. They had over $200 million of funding, bought a competitor, and just exploded. And so their development curve went like this. But then 2 years later, they went bankrupt. So it just completely flamed out in a very short time. All the venture capital was lost. Everything just went up in flames because there was no sustainable business model behind it. So what happened after that? Then, the good times of that kind of wore out, and everybody said, oh, well, so now we have to start cutting costs and whatever because we're not generating the revenue anymore. So then people looked to the digital idea and said, well, wait, this is a great way to cut costs. Right? We can get rid of printing, and we can get rid of distribution, and we can get rid of all these things, and we'll just put the content online, and it'll be so much cheaper that it will be easy to keep making money. And that's kind of what I meant about people going digital for the wrong reasons. A lot of publishers saw digital as a way to save money instead of do something that a reader actually was interested in. So we kind of keep going further down the path of we're just chasing the money and keep losing track of what the reader really wants. I mean, I don't think that any or not very many IT publishers ask their readers, would you like to read this in an app? Are you interested in this? Do you want to read it in digital form? Because in the end, they didn't. The readers did not pick up on the digital side. They did at the beginning. Sometimes they weren't given a choice. But in general, I was speaking to Miro last night, and he confirmed the same numbers just from other publishers in Switzerland, for example, that you can convert something like 10 to 15% of your readership from analog to digital, and it's nearly impossible to make the same money from 15% of your readers that you used to in an analog system, even though it, in theory, has other costs like printing and distribution. So the cost-cutting aspect was the main driver for going digital at that point. And then I have another example of a competitor of ours from England. They were really driven by the share price argument. Digital was the thing. And so they installed, the board of directors installed a new manager who was going to digitalize the whole company and focus everything on digital and digital first, and digital was every second word that he said. And so they really jumped on this and really pushed it hard. And it was exciting times, I have to say. I followed it very closely. They started selling off a lot of old assets that nobody wants anymore, so they had whole series of magazines that they were not just an IT publisher, they had other topics as well, but so for example, they had music, they had a whole division of music, and they said, well, that's going to be hard to make that whole business digital, so we're going to sell it. And we're going to sell this, we're going to sell that, and so they sold off a lot of their established business to get money to digitalize everything else. And they created some really fantastic looking apps. They had, some of the best digital magazines that I've ever seen. They were really great to look at, but in the end, it was just the technology people having fun and building something that they thought was the maximum possible or the coolest thing that they could come up with. The problem was that nobody was willing to pay for it. It was just way too expensive. You couldn't afford it. And nobody had ever asked the reader if they really wanted this thing in the first place. And at the beginning, there was some general interest, but it just kind of fizzled out. The result is this company also nearly killed itself doing this. Their stock price dropped down to 12 pence per stock instead of 36 pounds that it was earlier at kind of at the peak. So the board came back in, threw all those people out, put the CFO in charge, and she's kept the company alive and actually went back around and bought back most of the assets that they had sold off to other publishers to rebuild the business that they had 10 years before the whole digital age started. So again, what's the reasoning for going digital? They were doing it to promote themselves as managers, I think, and to work on their share price, and that worked for a while, but then it completely crashed. So what came next? So after the wave of digitalization, in that sense, so now we have all these websites and all these things, and advertising has really gone down the tubes, so now we have essentially a completely automated advertising industry with everything being programmatic. And so now the publisher has everything online, most of it for free, has no more control over advertising, and makes nearly no money out of it. So that's kind of where most IT publishers ended up, and that's why most of them have given up. I mean, there was a massive consolidation. The companies that bought up most of the IT industry are a few big companies that actually changed their how they branded themselves. They said, we're not publishers anymore, we're marketing companies. And what they essentially did is they went around and bought up every small and mid-size IT publisher that they could find, and the sole purpose of doing that was just to get their database. And they used this database to continue the idea of the lead generation that was popular 15 years ago, and most of those companies are now also, they still exist, but they're hardly relevant anymore. So we've always been a small company, and we're now basically the only real IT publisher in English. I mean, the German market is a little bit different, but we're nearly the only IT publisher left for professional IT content, which I find extremely odd, that we've done that. But it's just partly because we didn't burn all of our opportunity through overdoing the digital idea. So for us, the great thing has come back around. Now you have content marketing is the latest trend in IT publishing, just like a lot of other things. And this actually finally is something that's good for us because it's what we've always been about. It's about writing good content for the reader that stays engaged because you're actually providing some value to them. And that's essentially what the message is here. Do something that your readers or your customers are actually interested in, and not just what all of the your colleagues or your customers are asking for. So what are the lessons to learn out of this, or what are the lessons that I've learned out of these things, or by talking to other people? And I guess the main question or the main lesson is ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why go digital? Why do anything else? We're just using digital transformation as an example, but I have these really vivid memories at being at industry events, and then you're talking to other IT publishers, and you've got a few advertisers there, and so it's like, what do you guys are going digital? Yeah, we're going digital. Yeah, you're going digital too, right? I mean, everybody's going digital, and so it was really fascinating for me to sit there and watch this, how everybody stood in a room to convince each other that digital was the right thing to do. So nobody was really sure. Some people, I guess, were convinced about it, but most people weren't sure. And so everybody felt like everybody else was doing it, so I better do it too. And in the end, most people were just changing their business model to go completely digital just because they felt like they had to because everybody else was. And I'm going to miss out. And the advertisers So you ask the advertiser, well, are you guys still, do you want us to go digital? Well, yeah, it seems like it's more efficient or whatever. I can calculate the ROI better and things like that. And so I think that a whole industry changed their business model just because it was the cool thing to do. It was a trendy thing, but it wasn't the right thing to do. And so that's the question. In all of these discussions, nobody ever asked the reader, nobody ever asked the people who are supposed to consume the content what they really wanted. And they would not have said that they wanted all to be digital. There's a certain aspect to that, but not a lot. So obviously, like I said, it's not like we've completely ignored digitalization. So I guess that's another lesson that I would say is you can't do too much too soon. Obviously, if we do nothing to provide any digital content, then we won't be here much longer either. So that's something that we obviously have to do, and we started it years ago. But I remember many discussions when we were doing our first apps about what should these apps do? And there's all these, gazillion features that you can choose from, and should it do this, and what are the other people doing, and all this. And in the end, kind of like in an earlier presentation, better done than perfect, we just said we're going to do a minimalistic app. It's essentially just letting you turn PDF pages, and it does nothing else. And we'll see what happens, and then go from there. So what happened when we released those apps, we had about 10 to 15%, depending on the product, of our readers that switched from print to digital. So our digital readership jumped up like this, and then it went flat, and that was about 8 years ago, and that number has never changed. We have essentially the same number of people and the same percentage of people reading our content in digital form as we did back then, because for them, that was good enough. And there's hardly been any real request for an app with a lot more features. A lot of companies that I know spent millions of dollars trying to develop a fancy app that could do all these things, and it was maybe nice to have, but in the end, nobody really cared, and so it was just wasted money. So surely pay attention to new trends and new technologies or what's coming up on the horizon, but that doesn't mean that it's the right thing for everybody to take action on that today. Need to be aware of it, but doesn't have to do it. And it seems so obvious, but make sure that there's a business model in what you're doing. I find that also fascinating to look back at the IT publishing industry and think about how many of these massive trends that were followed by nearly every publisher that didn't have a clear business model behind it. So, why are we putting all of our content online and we don't really know how we're going to get paid for that? So why did people do that? I don't know. When I look back at it now, it's hard to answer that question, but what is the business model? And that's obviously a very difficult question to answer, but if there's no money in it, then you have to have another good reason to do it. And again, I would say another lesson, focus on the customer. Really, we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves or talking to each other in the industry about what are the trends and how are things going to be and how we're going to serve the next billion people and things like that. But is that what the customers that you have today, is that what they're really interested in? Maybe that's a business that will start in 5 years and really develop in 20 years, but you have to keep your existing customers now in order to even reach that point where you can be investing in the future. So ask them or ask yourself what your existing customers truly are interested in. And I think one other, I'm also a technology person. I'm a computer scientist, and so I also can get very fascinated with technology or new approaches to doing things, but I think that's one of the key lessons here is also because it's good for the industry. Every new technology that comes along is almost always completely overhyped. So the digitalization is just another example of that, or putting everything in the cloud is another example. Obviously, there are advantages to these things, and a lot of these trends are really going to happen, and they really do happen, and they really have important advantages. But they typically are not so important as they sound, and they're not nearly as important to do them right now as they are to do later. So if we take an example and say that a typical company should, average size company that just manufactures something, should they have their entire IT in the cloud? Probably not. It's probably still too early for that. But if they would listen to all of the hype, they would have done it 10 years ago. But that would have lots of problems associated with that. So I think it's just very important to remind yourself that every technology that comes along probably has a future, but that future is never as exaggerated and is never as soon as it sounds like when everybody's talking about it. So there's a lot of advantages to sitting back, watching all the mistakes that everyone else makes, and then decide what's right for your business and move into that space. I mean, obviously, unless your business model is to be on the cutting edge, then sitting back and waiting until the dust settles has a lot of advantages to it. So just to wrap up, what is the message? Digital transformation, just like any other technology, is not always the right choice at a certain time. Sooner or later, it will surely happen, but it's not always the right choice. Do what's right for your business, even if that means completely skipping a trend and staying outside the group don't follow every group or the bandwagon that comes through. You don't have to participate in everything that happens. And I thought it was interesting listening to Vanessa yesterday about the idea of moving outside your comfort zone, and that made me think about it. It also, again, sounds counterintuitive, but it would be outside your comfort zone to sometimes do nothing. So if the entire industry is moving in one direction and everybody around you is telling you this is what you have to do, this is the future, and we have to do this now and whatever, and so you feel like you must participate in these things, sometimes it's the right thing, but it's a very uncomfortable thing just to say, you know what, we're not going to do that. I don't have to be on the front end of everything. I'm just going to stay here and do what we've been doing in the past because that's what makes my customers happy. And you guys go out and be innovative, and that's fine, but I'm going to be different. And that's also putting yourself outside your comfort zone to sometimes do nothing. And so that's maybe a little bit different way to look at it. And I hope this counter example of digitalization is somehow useful for you. Obviously, these ideas can be applied to anything else, but thank you for your time.
Yeah. Wow, rock and roll, as I told you. So now we have the unique possibility to have a real analog look at the proportionality between number of frames and number of questions. Are there any questions?
A one-frame presentation.
One-frame presentation, no question. That means direct proportional. No, one, yeah.
I have two questions. Okay. One is, how old is your average customer? And also, how you said focus on the customer, how do you get the feedback from the customers?
Okay, so the age of our average customer depends on the brand, but they typically are 35 to 55. So it has to do with the kind of content that we have, so it's people that are IT decision makers of some kind. So in order to get to that position in a company, you typically have to have been around a while. So that's what we're looking at from the age and how we stay in touch with them. Sometimes it's just very simple things, going to trade shows and having a booth and not trying to sell something. I have a hard time to make that decision myself because you think we're going to spend thousands of dollars to go to a trade show, and you stand there for 3 days and just talk to people, and at the end of the day you only spent money. But it's very valuable just to be there talking to people to understand what they're interested in. Social media has been useful for us in that sense because it's a much faster, more immediate feedback loop. We also do regular reader surveys. which comes from the days of print. We used to do them on paper and now do them online. But it's just an effort, I guess, to try to just stay in tune with your market in many different ways. Try to be in the middle of it and participate in it as your readers would, which is difficult for a lot of businesses, I'm sure. But those are some of the ideas or some of the ways that we do that.
Okay. So as Brian, I don't need a card for the next announcement because I learned it by heart.
Lunch.
12 o'clock until 1 p.m. lunch break. But I would say 1:15. Is it okay? Because we're a bit over the time to enjoy. 1:15. Let's say 1:15 here in this room again. Enjoy the lunch break. Brian Osborn.